The truth is in your hands. You can no longer deny it.
We know what you did.
It's not what it looks like. Please listen to me.
The Foundation reports are concerning. Indeed, madam. But we will resolve this.
You have everything you need to succeed. Just focus on your unique story and write with conviction.
Thank you. I feel much more confident now.
You knew all along. It's time for the truth.
I had to wait for the right moment. He can't deny it now. It's all here. No, that can't be. Look at this name. Oh my God. It's really him.
Thank you, I am home. And you always will be. We finally belong.
Sometimes the person everyone calls an outsider is the only one who truly belongs. Those words would not mean anything to Maya Brooks on the night she drove through the iron gates of the Whitmore estate. But before that evening was over, they would begin to follow her like a shadow. The mansion stood on nearly 20 acres outside Charleston, South Carolina, glowing beneath strings of warm lights as dozens of luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Inside, members of the Whitmore family gathered to celebrate the 72nd birthday of Eleanor Whitmore, the respected matriarch whose name appeared on hospitals, libraries, and charitable foundations across the state. Maya parked her aging sedan near the far edge of the property, far away from the expensive cars belonging to the rest of the guests. She checked her reflection in the mirror, smoothed the sleeves of her simple navy dress, and took a slow breath before stepping out. She had attended Whitmore family events before, yet every invitation felt like a mystery. She was not listed on the family tree. She shared no last name with anyone inside. No one ever explained why Eleanor insisted she be included. As Maya entered the grand ballroom, conversations softened for a moment. Not enough to stop, just enough for people to notice her. She recognized the familiar expressions immediately. Curious glances, forced smiles, quiet judgment. Some guests nodded politely before turning away. Others pretended not to see her at all. Maya was used to it. She collected a glass of sparkling water and moved toward a quiet corner near a window overlooking the gardens. Across the room, laughter echoed from a group of relatives gathered beneath a crystal chandelier. They looked comfortable, connected, certain of where they belonged. Maya had spent most of her life feeling the opposite. Growing up in foster homes, she learned early that belonging was not something everyone received automatically. Sometimes it felt like a club with invisible rules and locked doors. Tonight felt no different. A pair of cousins glanced in her direction. One whispered something. The other smirked. Maya looked away before she could hear the words. She had learned not to chase answers that people were unwilling to give. At the center of the room stood Eleanor Whitmore, elegant in a deep emerald dress, greeting guests with grace and confidence. Unlike everyone else, Eleanor always looked directly at Maya when they met, as though she were searching for something hidden beneath the surface. When their eyes briefly met across the ballroom, Eleanor smiled warmly. Maya returned the smile, though she still could not explain why the older woman seemed determined to keep her close. As dinner approached, guests moved toward their assigned tables. Maya searched for her name card and found it placed at the very edge of the room beside a decorative column. She almost laughed. Close enough to attend, far enough to be forgotten. Yet as she sat down and watched the Whitmore family celebrate together, she could not shake the strange feeling that somewhere inside these walls existed a story no one wanted her to hear. And for reasons she did not yet understand, that story seemed connected to her. The evening continued beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and soft music drifting through the ballroom. But Maya could feel the invisible distance between herself and nearly everyone in the room. Servers moved gracefully between tables while members of the Whitmore family shared stories, laughed at old memories, and spoke about vacations, business ventures, and upcoming weddings. Maya listened quietly while eating her dinner, speaking only when someone addressed her directly. Even then, the conversations rarely lasted more than a few seconds. It was as if people acknowledged her presence out of obligation rather than genuine interest. Across the room, Eleanor occasionally glanced in Maya's direction, and each time Maya noticed, the older woman offered the same reassuring smile. It was a small gesture, yet somehow it made enduring the evening easier. As dessert was served, guests began moving around more freely. Maya stepped outside onto a stone terrace overlooking the gardens, hoping to enjoy a few minutes of fresh air. The night was warm, and rows of decorative lights illuminated pathways winding through carefully maintained hedges and flower beds. She leaned against a railing and watched a fountain shimmer under the moonlight. For a moment, the quiet felt comforting. Then voices approached from behind. Maya recognized them immediately. Two of Eleanor's grandchildren, along with a few cousins, had stepped onto the terrace carrying drinks. They did not notice her standing in the shadows near the far end. At first, she considered walking away, but then she heard her own name. She froze. "I still do not understand why grandmother keeps inviting her," one woman said. Another laughed softly. "Because grandmother feels sorry for people. She always has." "No," a third voice replied. "There has to be another reason. Maya has been showing up for years." Someone chuckled. "Maybe she is hoping she will end up in the will." A few of them laughed. Maya looked down at the stone floor beneath her feet. The comments were not surprising, yet hearing them spoken aloud still hurt. Then another voice spoke, louder than the rest. "Honestly, she acts like she belongs here. She does not. She is still an outsider." More laughter followed. Maya closed her eyes briefly. She had heard similar words before in different places from different people. Yet hearing them here felt different because a part of her had always wondered whether there was some truth hidden behind Eleanor's invitations. Why had the most powerful person in the family insisted on including her year after year? Before Maya could leave unnoticed, a familiar voice interrupted the group. "That is enough." The terrace fell silent. Eleanor Whitmore stood near the doorway. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes were firm. No one spoke. The relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Eleanor slowly stepped forward. "A person's worth is not determined by whether you approve of them," she said. Nobody challenged her. After a few moments, the group quietly drifted back inside. Maya remained where she was, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or grateful. Eleanor approached and stood beside her, looking out across the gardens. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Eleanor said something that caught Maya completely off guard. "There are people in this family who do not understand why you are here." Maya forced a small smile. "I noticed." Eleanor nodded slowly. Then she looked directly at Maya and said, "One day, they will wish they had asked a different question." Before Maya could ask what she meant, Eleanor turned and walked back into the mansion, leaving Maya alone beneath the lights, wondering why those words sounded less like an opinion and more like a warning. The birthday celebration ended later that evening, but Eleanor's words remained in Maya's mind long after she drove home. "One day they will wish they had asked a different question." The sentence repeated itself during the following week as Maya returned to her normal routine. She worked at a nonprofit community center in downtown Charleston, helping teenagers prepare for college applications and career programs. The work gave her purpose, yet even while reviewing paperwork or speaking with students, she occasionally found herself wondering why Eleanor seemed so certain about something she had never explained. A few days later, a powerful coastal storm moved through the region. Heavy rain and strong winds swept across Charleston throughout the night. The Whitmore estate suffered only minor damage, but one section of the mansion's upper floor experienced a roof leak. Water entered part of the attic, forcing staff members to inspect decades of stored belongings before any permanent damage could occur. For most families, the attic would have contained holiday decorations and forgotten furniture. The Whitmores were different. Generations of family history had been boxed and stored there. Old photographs, letters, journals, newspaper clippings, legal documents, and personal keepsakes filled dozens of shelves beneath the sloped roof. 2 days after the storm, Eleanor instructed several employees to begin sorting through everything. Anything damaged would be restored if possible. Anything important would be cataloged and preserved. Late that afternoon, a longtime estate employee named Robert opened a section of storage that had apparently remained untouched for years. Dust covered nearly every surface. Several cardboard boxes had softened from moisture, and partially collapsed. As Robert carefully moved items to a dry area, he discovered a large leather-bound photo album tucked behind an old wooden trunk. The album appeared ordinary at first glance. The cover showed signs of age, and some pages had loosened from the binding. Assuming it was simply another collection of family photographs, Robert placed it on a nearby table and continued working. Hours later, Eleanor stopped by the attic to check on the cleanup effort. Robert mentioned the album among the items recovered from storage. Eleanor nodded absent-mindedly and opened it while standing near a window. Most of the photographs showed familiar scenes from decades of family gatherings, vacations, weddings, and holidays. Then she reached a page that caused her hand to stop moving. Her eyes narrowed. For several seconds, she simply stared. The photograph appeared to have been taken approximately 25 years earlier. A young woman stood in a garden holding a baby wrapped in a light blanket. Eleanor immediately recognized the woman, although she had not seen her face in many years. What unsettled her was not the image itself. It was the writing beneath it. The caption area appeared damaged, as though someone had intentionally scratched through part of the ink. Most of the words were impossible to read. Only a few letters remained visible. Eleanor leaned closer. The name had been crossed out so thoroughly that it should have been unreadable. Yet one detail remained. A single word could still be identified. Maya. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar chill despite the warm afternoon. She looked again at the infant in the photograph. Then she looked at the partially erased name. For the first time in years, a question she thought had been buried long ago suddenly returned to the surface. And deep inside, Eleanor began to fear that the storm had uncovered far more than water damage. That evening, Eleanor carried the photograph to her private study and locked the door behind her. The room had witnessed decades of family decisions, business negotiations, and personal reflections. Yet she could not remember the last time a single image had unsettled her so deeply. She placed the photograph beneath a reading lamp and examined every detail again. The young woman holding the infant was unmistakably Caroline Hayes, a former employee who had worked at the estate for a brief period more than 2 decades earlier. Caroline had disappeared from Charleston suddenly, leaving behind rumors, unanswered questions, and very little documentation. Eleanor had not thought about her in years. What disturbed her now was the partially erased caption. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure the name could not be read. Why would anyone destroy a simple label beneath a family photograph? The next morning, Eleanor contacted her oldest son, Richard Whitmore, and asked him to visit. When he arrived, she showed him the photograph without revealing her concerns. Richard studied it for a moment before shrugging. "Looks like an old employee and her child," he said. "Nothing unusual." Eleanor pointed toward the damaged caption. Someone crossed out the name. Richard glanced down. Maybe the album was damaged.
No, Eleanor replied quietly.
This was intentional. Richard looked unconvinced. He examined the photograph again before offering a theory that quickly felt reasonable to everyone else. Caroline must have worked for the family. The baby was probably hers. At some point, the photograph ended up in the wrong album. The crossed-out writing was likely a mistake someone tried to correct years ago. Simple, harmless, unimportant. By the end of the day, several family members had heard about the discovery and reached the same conclusion. A few even laughed about how much attention was being given to an old photograph. The mystery appeared solved almost as quickly as it had begun. Yet Eleanor remained uneasy. The explanation fit too neatly. More importantly, it failed to answer a question that kept growing louder in her mind. Why had the surviving letters of the erased name formed the word Maya? Later that week, Eleanor invited Maya to lunch at a quiet restaurant overlooking Charleston Harbor. They spoke about work, community programs, and everyday life. Eleanor never mentioned the photograph. Instead, she observed. She watched Maya smile at the staff. She listened to her stories. She noticed familiar expressions that stirred memories she could not fully explain. At one point, Maya laughed at a small joke, and Eleanor felt an unexpected sense of recognition pass through her. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Driving home afterward, Eleanor tried convincing herself that she was imagining connections that did not exist. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. That night she returned to the photograph once more. This time she noticed something she had overlooked before. Tucked behind the image was a faint indentation left by another piece of paper that had once rested against it for years. The marks were difficult to see, but under the light they revealed the outline of handwriting. Eleanor could not read the words, but she knew immediately what it meant. The photograph had not originally been alone. At some point, another document had been attached to it and later removed. Suddenly, the simple explanation everyone accepted no longer felt convincing. If someone had erased a name and removed a document, then the photograph was not evidence of a mistake. It was evidence that somebody wanted part of the story to disappear. For the first time in many years, Eleanor Whitmore began investigating her own family's past without telling anyone. The discovery behind the photograph had unsettled her enough to ignore the convenient explanations everyone else had accepted. Over the following week, she quietly searched through storage rooms, filing cabinets, and archived records that had accumulated across decades. Most of what she found seemed ordinary. Financial documents, newspaper clippings, event invitations, and family correspondence filled dozens of boxes. Yet Eleanor knew that if someone had intentionally removed part of a story, the remaining pieces might still exist somewhere. One rainy afternoon, she unlocked a cedar chest that had belonged to her late sister. The chest had not been opened in years. Inside were old journals, greeting cards, and neatly bundled letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. As she sorted through them, a familiar name suddenly caught her attention. Caroline Hayes, Eleanor's. Pulse quickened. She carefully unfolded the first letter. It had never been mailed. Then she opened another, and another. Within minutes she realized she was holding a collection of personal letters written more than 20 years earlier. Some were addressed to friends. Others appeared intended for family members. None had ever been sent. The letters revealed a side of Caroline that Eleanor had never known. She wrote about loneliness, uncertainty, and fear. She wrote about difficult choices and promises she felt forced to keep. Most importantly, she repeatedly mentioned a child. Eleanor continued reading long into the evening. Several pages referred to protecting someone. Other passages hinted that important people wanted certain information hidden. Names were rarely written directly, as if Caroline feared the letters might be discovered. Yet one sentence stopped Eleanor cold. "If anything happens to me, she deserves to know where she came from." Eleanor read the line 3 times. She turned the page, hoping for clarification, but the next section had been torn away. Several additional letters contained missing pages. Someone had deliberately removed portions of the collection. The pattern felt impossible to ignore. Important names appeared just before missing sections. Significant explanations ended abruptly. Entire paragraphs had vanished. By midnight, Eleanor sat alone in her study, surrounded by scattered papers. The deeper she looked, the more obvious it became that this was not the story of a former employee and her child. Someone had spent considerable effort erasing details from the historical record. The following day, Eleanor contacted an attorney who specialized in archival research and record recovery. She asked him to help locate public documents connected to Caroline Hayes from 25 years earlier. Marriage records, property records, hospital registrations, anything that still existed. While waiting for results, Eleanor could not stop thinking about Maya. Certain details now seemed impossible to dismiss. The photograph, the erased name, the missing document, the unsent letters. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they formed the outline of a much larger secret. Yet one troubling fact remained. None of the evidence actually connected Maya to the Whitmore family. Not yet. Despite her growing suspicions, Eleanor still lacked proof. But deep down she sensed that the truth was getting closer. And if the missing pages were ever found, they might reveal not only what had been hidden, but who had spent years making sure it stayed hidden. 3 days later, Eleanor received a call from the attorney she had hired. His voice sounded unusually cautious. He explained that most of the records connected to Caroline Hayes had either been archived incorrectly or were incomplete. That alone was not unusual for documents more than 2 decades old. What caught his attention was that several files appeared to have been modified around the same period. Certain entries had been corrected. Others had been removed entirely. One hospital registration listed a child whose information no longer matched later records. Another document referenced a legal review that could not be located anywhere in the archive system. Eleanor listened carefully without interrupting. By the time the call ended, she knew one thing with certainty. Someone had not merely hidden pieces of the story. Someone had actively changed them. That evening she sat alone in her study reviewing copies of the recovered documents. Most were fragmented and incomplete, but one detail appeared repeatedly. Caroline Hayes had spent several months communicating with an attorney shortly before disappearing from Charleston. The attorney had died years earlier, yet his firm still existed. Eleanor immediately arranged a meeting. 2 days later, she arrived at the firm's downtown office carrying copies of the letters and photographs. The senior partner spent nearly an hour examining the material before excusing himself to search archived storage. When he returned, he carried a thin file folder covered in dust. According to internal notes, Caroline had requested legal assistance involving guardianship concerns and identity documentation. Unfortunately, most of the original records had been sealed or transferred. Yet one memo remained. Eleanor read it slowly. The memo referenced a request to protect a minor child from becoming involved in a family controversy involving prominent local individuals. No names were listed. No family was identified. But one sentence stood out immediately. The child's connection must remain confidential until further notice. Eleanor felt a chill run through her. The wording sounded deliberate, planned, official. The child had not been hidden accidentally. The secrecy had been organized. On her drive home, Eleanor began connecting pieces that previously seemed unrelated. Caroline's unsent letters, the altered records, the missing pages, the crossed-out name, the confidential legal memo. Together they painted a disturbing picture. Years ago, someone had decided that a child's identity needed to disappear. Yet the reason remained frustratingly out of reach. Later that week, Eleanor invited Maya to the estate for afternoon tea. Maya accepted without hesitation. As they sat together overlooking the gardens, Eleanor found herself studying the young woman more closely than ever. Maya spoke about a scholarship program she was helping develop. She spoke about children who struggled to find opportunities. She spoke with kindness, patience, and quiet confidence. The longer Eleanor listened, the more difficult it became to ignore what she was beginning to feel. There was a familiarity she could not explain. Not proof, not evidence, just an instinct that refused to fade. Before Maya left, Eleanor asked a question she had never asked before. "Have you ever known anything about your biological family?" Maya hesitated before answering. "Almost nothing." Every lead eventually disappeared. Eleanor nodded slowly. She tried to hide her reaction, but inside her thoughts were racing. Because for the first time since finding the photograph, she realized the secret might not simply involve a child connected to the Whitmore family. It might involve a child who had spent her entire life searching for answers that somebody else had spent decades making sure she would never find. The breakthrough arrived when Eleanor least expected it. Nearly 2 weeks after beginning her investigation, she received a package from the archival researcher assisting her attorney. Most of the contents were copies of documents she had already reviewed, but one item immediately caught her attention. It was a transfer log from a county records office dated 24 years earlier. At first glance, it appeared routine. Then Eleanor noticed a handwritten note in the margin. The note referenced a corrected birth registration that had been refiled under a different name. No explanation accompanied the change. No authorization form remained attached. Yet the timing matched the period when Caroline Hayes had vanished from Charleston. Eleanor contacted the researcher immediately and requested every surviving document connected to the registration. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. Inside was a photocopy of a birth certificate that appeared incomplete. Several sections were obscured by age and damage. The name of the child, however, remained visible. Eleanor stared at the page for several seconds before reading it again. Then a third time, her hands began to tremble. The document did not belong to Caroline Hayes. It belonged to a little girl, and the first name listed on the certificate was Maya. Eleanor's heart raced as she examined the remaining details. The surname section had been altered. Traces of the original entry remained beneath the correction marks, but the replacement name was impossible to miss. Brooks, the same surname Maya had carried her entire life. Yet beneath the modified section, faint impressions of the original handwriting still lingered. Eleanor adjusted the light and leaned closer. Only a few letters could be identified. Not enough to confirm the full surname. Not enough to serve as proof. But enough to convince her that Maya Brooks had not originally been Maya Brooks. Someone had changed her identity. The realization transformed everything. Until now, Eleanor had believed the secret involved Maya's mother. The photograph, the letters, the missing records, all of it seemed centered around Caroline Hayes. But this document suggested a far more disturbing possibility. The person whose identity had been altered was not Caroline. It was Maya herself. That evening, Eleanor sat alone reviewing every piece of evidence collected so far. The photograph with the erased caption, the missing attachment, the unsent letters, the confidential legal memo, the altered birth registration. For the first time, the pieces began fitting together into a coherent picture. A child had been born. Her records had been changed. Her connection to someone important had been concealed. Her history had been rewritten before she was old enough to remember any of it. Yet one question remained unanswered. Who had benefited from making her disappear? The following morning, Eleanor requested a private meeting with Maya. When Maya arrived, she immediately sensed that something had changed. Eleanor appeared unusually serious. After a few moments of conversation, Maya quietly asked whether everything was all right. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment before responding. "I think someone took something from you many years ago." Maya frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Eleanor hesitated. She was not ready to reveal everything yet. Not until she had proof strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Not until she understood the entire truth. But deep inside, she already knew one thing. The young woman sitting across from her had spent her entire life searching for her past. And for the first time, that past was beginning to search for her. The final missing piece appeared in a place no one had thought to search. Nearly a month after the photograph was discovered, Eleanor received a call from the daughter of the attorney who had once represented Caroline Hayes. While clearing out her late father's storage unit, she had found several sealed boxes containing old client materials that had never been digitized. Most were routine records, but one file carried a note instructing that it be delivered personally if anyone ever inquired about Caroline's case. Within hours, Eleanor was sitting across from the woman at a conference table, staring at a worn manila folder that had remained untouched for more than 2 decades. Inside were copies of correspondence, legal notes, and a sealed statement prepared by Caroline shortly before she disappeared from Charleston. Eleanor opened the statement first. The words struck her with immediate force. Caroline wrote that she feared powerful people would erase the truth if it ever became public. She described constant pressure to remain silent. She described being told that revealing certain facts would damage reputations and create a scandal capable of affecting multiple generations. Most importantly, she explained why she had agreed to protect a child. As Eleanor continued reading, her heart pounded harder with every page. Caroline was not the child's mother. She had been the child's guardian. The little girl had been entrusted to her temporarily while legal arrangements were made. But those arrangements had never been completed. Instead, the child's records were altered, her identity was reassigned, and her connection to a prominent family was quietly removed. Eleanor reached the final page and stopped breathing for a moment. Attached behind the statement was a photocopy of a document she had never seen before. It was an earlier version of the birth registration. Unlike the altered copy discovered weeks earlier, this one showed the original information before any modifications occurred. The surname section remained clear and untouched. Eleanor stared at it for several long seconds. Then tears filled her eyes. The original surname was Whitmore. Not Brooks. Whitmore. The room seemed to fall silent around her. Every question that had haunted her investigation suddenly had an answer. The erased photograph, the missing pages, the altered records, the confidential legal instructions, the hidden identity. Someone had deliberately removed a child from the Whitmore family history. Not because she was unrelated, because she was related. Eleanor immediately recognized another name listed within the supporting documents. The person who had authorized the changes was not a distant stranger. It was a member of the family itself, a trusted relative who had controlled important legal decisions at the time. For years, that individual had benefited from Maya's absence without anyone realizing it. As Eleanor drove home carrying the file, she understood that everything was about to change. Maya had spent her entire life believing she was standing outside a family that never truly accepted her. The truth was far crueler. She had never been outside at all. She had been pushed out. Her place had been taken from her before she was old enough to remember it. And soon the people who spent years calling her an outsider would have to confront a reality they never imagined. The woman they dismissed was not standing at the edge of the family story. She had been at its center from the very beginning. 2 weeks later, Eleanor Whitmore invited the entire family to the estate for what appeared to be an ordinary gathering. No explanation was provided. No agenda was shared. Yet word spread quickly that attendance was expected. By sunset, the ballroom was filled once again with relatives, business associates, and longtime family friends. Many assumed Eleanor intended to discuss estate planning. Others believed she was preparing to announce changes to her charitable foundation. Maya arrived with the same uncertainty she had felt during every previous invitation. She greeted familiar faces, accepted polite smiles, and took her place near the edge of the room. What she did not know was that Eleanor had spent the previous 14 days verifying every document, every signature, and every surviving record connected to the secret that had remained hidden for more than 2 decades. When everyone had settled into their seats, Eleanor stepped to the front of the room. The conversations stopped immediately. She began calmly, speaking about family history, responsibility, and the importance of truth. At first, her words seemed unrelated to anything significant. Then she revealed the photograph. Murmurs spread throughout the room. Several relatives exchanged confused glances. Eleanor continued by describing the missing records, the erased names, the altered documents, and the letters that had remained hidden for years. The atmosphere changed. Smiles disappeared. Nobody interrupted. Finally, Eleanor held up the original birth registration. Her voice remained steady as she explained that a child's identity had been deliberately changed and that her connection to the family had been concealed. Maya sat, motionless, unable to understand where the story was leading. Then Eleanor turned toward her. For a moment, the room seemed to stop breathing. For many years, Eleanor said, this family asked the wrong question. Her eyes moved across the audience. People kept asking why Maya was here. Nobody asked why she had been kept away. Complete silence followed. Eleanor then revealed the original surname recorded on the document. Several people gasped. Others simply stared. Maya felt as though the floor beneath her had vanished. She looked at the papers, then back at Eleanor, unable to process what she was hearing. Eleanor walked toward her and gently placed the verified records into her hands. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she saw the evidence for herself. The answers she had searched for her entire life were no longer missing. They had been hidden. The woman who believed she had no place in the family learned that she had always belonged there. Around the room, many relatives lowered their eyes. Some appeared shocked. Others looked ashamed. The years of whispered comments and dismissive assumptions suddenly carried a different weight. Maya did not speak immediately. She simply stared at the documents while emotions she could not name moved through her all at once. Eventually, Eleanor rested a hand on her shoulder and smiled. It was the same warm smile Maya had seen for years, but now she finally understood it. Eleanor had recognized something long before she could prove it. The evening ended not with arguments or celebrations, but with something far more powerful: truth. As guests slowly departed, a family photographer captured one final picture. This time Maya was not standing alone near the edge of the frame. She stood beside Eleanor at the center. And for the first time in her life, she no longer felt like someone searching for where she belonged. She knew.
Before this story ends, take a moment to think about Maya's story. How many people feel invisible every day? Not because they are lack of value, but someone decided they are not belong. Some of life's deepest wound not come from harsh work, but from being ignored, being unseen, and being overlooked. Yet, Maya never let the other define her worth. She stayed kind, stayed patient, and stayed true to herself. Sometimes we feel different, feel excluded, feel like outsider in a world that we not fit. What if the place where you feel least accepted, where is your truth, one day will be revealed? This story reminds us that belonging doesn't come from popularity, status, or approval from the others. It's begins with knowing your own value. So if ever you feel overlooked, or you question it where you belong, remember Maya. Keep moving forward, keep showing kindness, and keep believing in yourself. Because sometimes the person everyone sees as an outsider is the very person who meant to be all along. If you like this video, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.